Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. I'm Erica Bunker of Erica Bunker DIY Style. If you're new to my channel, I hope you see what you like and click below and subscribe. Today, we're sewing along with Mccall's 7838, which is a button-down top, and it has different sleeve variations. I'm doing this great take View 8, which is a really interesting take on like a puff sleeve, a nice statement sleeve, but I'm choosing to do like one of the longer lengths with the curved hem because I wanted to make sure that my shirt was able to stay tucked in. For the most part, I'm following through on the instructions as listed, but there are certain places where based on my experience with making shirts, I'm going to show you the way that I do things. And I hope you learn some valuable tips and techniques that you can take and use for any shirt that you make. My fabric is a Dubiani silver color, or might be considered a little platinum. And I cut the size 14. I didn't have to make any alterations to the length. The length is fine. It stays tucked in nicely. I didn't have to do a full bust adjustment. It fits great right out of the envelope. My fabric is a fabric that I've had in my stash for a while, and I'll try to link to something similar in case you're interested in using a similar fabric. I'll also link to my interfacing that I use. I hope you enjoy. To make the pleat on the back, working from the outside, bring the large circles together to make a crease. And here's the tip. Whenever you need to make a dart or a pleat, just make a clip right on the edge, right at the marking line, so that you can just match the clips together. Baste across the upper edge and press. With right sides together, pin one of the yoke pieces to the back while matching the center and the notches. Turn the entire thing over to the inside and pin the yoke facing right side to wrong side, matching the center and the notches. Stitch through all of the thickness using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Trim the seam allowance to 3/8 of an inch. Press the seam allowance up towards the yoke. Stitch the darts on the front. When stitching the dart, don't backstitch at the end. Stitch off of the edge and leave a tail to tie off. And this is how to tie off the dart. Press the dart down. Press under the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance on the unnotched edge of the front band. With right side of front band to wrong side of the front, pin the front band to the front with raw edges even and the notches matched. Stitch using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Repeat on the other side. Trim the seam allowance to 1/4 of an inch and press the seam allowance towards the front band. Turn the front band to the outside along the fold line and pin in place. Here's a sewing tip. For a more precise edge stitch, use an edge stitch foot or a blind hem stitch foot. Position the edge of the fabric next to the metal guide of the foot. Stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. Repeat on the other side. Once both front bands have been pressed, it's time to stitch the front and back sections together at the shoulder. With right sides together, stitch the shoulders of the yoke to the shoulders of the fronts. Pin and make sure that you're matching the notches. Stitch using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and repeat the process for the other side. This is my method for machine sewing the yoke facing instead of slip stitching by hand. Stitch using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and repeat the process for the other. Press the shoulder seams. Baste the neck and the armhole edges. Stay stitch the neck edge in preparation for the collar. Pin front and back together at the sides, matching the edges and the notches. Stitch using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Finish your seams with either your serger or a zigzag stitch and press the seams towards the back. These are the collar sections. You have an upper collar that's interfaced and an under collar that's uninterfaced. Reduce the under collar by 1/8 of an inch, only on the top and the sides. Pin the collar sections together by stretching the under collar to match the upper collar, leaving the notched edge open. Stitch across the top and then the sides, leaving the notched edge open. Trim the seam allowance from 5/8 of an inch to about 1/4 of an inch. Right before you get to the corner, angle in close, making sure to not cut into your stitches. Repeat this all the way around. This will give you a nice sharp point on your collar. Turn to the right side. Use a point turner to poke out the corner. Be gentle as to not poke a hole through the corner. Repeat on the other corner. The 1/8 of an inch seam allowance reduction on the undercollar creates a turn of cloth, meaning the seam line will not show from the right side. Press your collar at this point. Now we're going to attach the collar to the collar band. You have an under collar band which is interfaced and an upper collar band which is uninterfaced. If you haven't already done it, make sure to baste the raw edges of the collar together. Turn in 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on single notched edge of uninterfaced collar band section and press. Trim to 3/8 of an inch. The interface side of the collar is the top. So you're going to pin the uninterfaced collar band to the top side of the collar. Turn the whole thing over and pin the interface collar band to the other side. Making sure to ease around the curve, stitch a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance through all of the thickness. Trim the seam allowance to 3/8 of an inch. Clip the rounded corners, making V's so that there won't be any bunching when you turn to the right side. Repeat on the other side. Turn right side out and use the rounded edge of your point turner. Press the whole thing. Whenever you're attaching something curved to something straight, you want to clip into the pin the collar band to the neck edge. Stitch 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, making sure to keep the pressed edge free. Trim the seam allowance down to 3/8 of an inch and press toward the collar band. Instead of hand slip stitching, I'm using the sewing machine. With the collar band pinned in place, again, use your edge stitch foot or your blind hem stitch foot. Now for the sleeve. Pin the upper edge of sleeve together, matching the notches. Stitch using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Finish the seam with the serger and press seam towards the back. You'll always know the back of a sleeve because it has 2 notches. To make the pleats, you're working from the outside, crease along the lines and bring the creases to the center. Baste across the upper edge. Stitch the sleeve seam. Finish the seam with the serger and press towards the back. Make a 1 1/4 inch hem. With the right sides together, pin the sleeve into the armhole, matching the symbols and notches. Use plenty of pins to prevent puckering. Stitch using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and finish seam with your serger. To finish your shirt, hem and make buttonholes and add your buttons. Thanks so much for watching.